When Intel makes the slides describing how processors work, they describe especially the flexible, efficient cores, which they name them E-cores. And I personally think this is a misleading information, and I would want to clarify, even for the public, what means E-cores, uh, P-cores, and so on. So Intel, when you buy today a processor, will have some bigger cores, that they have something which is named hyperthreading, and they look very good in benchmarks, that they can get high frequency and high IPC, and efficient cores which are smaller supposedly are very good to do background tasks like handling Discord, and they run just one thread, they don't have hyper threading. And this is the part which I want to say that in this clip about, that the E-cores are not efficient E-cores, not today at least. So for people who don't know, the E-cores are basically some revision of Atom kind of cores. And for people who want to look on the Intel numbers, is that Intel, they did this before with a 7-watt CPU, and they wanted to show how performance goes, and so on. And one part which Intel says is that, look, there are some efficiency curves, and this big core gives you some power. But one part which you should clearly see in the graph already. So let's use that, I don't know what scale, but let's say you want, let's say this is a 20 watt power that you can put even today, kind of, this is the amount you can put in a core. After that is very less, little efficient. So if you want to limit, instead of 20 watts to the core, you limit it to 8. So 8 watts means 40%. So if you go here with 80%, so cutting the power by 2.5 times, you'll get 70% of the performance. This is quite common. So the single part which Intel have to do to improve the power by 2.5 times is obviously to reduce the frequency, and the performance you'll cut 30%, but it's not good for benchmarks, but you can improve by 2.5 times the efficiency, or reduce it by 40%, and you reduce more than 3 times the necessity of power. So just I want to make it clear that the big cores could be very efficient. You just have to reduce the frequency, which the process in general, they do it automatically, but it's a misunderstanding that the big cores are not efficient, for example. The other part which we should understand is that Intel made it in the past with one core, and they attached to it 4 Atom cores. And I think there was this benchmark online. There is this compute benchmark Cinebench, and this is very good. We can compare with a EMD, let's say small cores which EMD made. And I understand that EMD had it. It's not one-to-one comparable, but EMD had only this small cores that they were one of the process. The transistor size was quite bad at the time, so it's one node is named weaker, but EMD could score around 106 points with this 7 watts CPU, which was respectable for the time. I don't want to bash them, but let's compare with the score of Intel. So the same benchmark, let's say Cinebench R15. So instead of 106, you can get 255. And I will go back to the screenshot. So 255, it's even more. That U processor, this one should be a 15 watt CPU. It will not reach this. I think it's a 45 watt CPU, but it's respectable. So if it's just one core, uh, you could not get all this performance. So what happens behind the scenes is that if you use all the cores, you get at least a lot more performance. Even you are constraining the same wattage of just 4 cores, which are efficiency. And good. So these are the numbers. The other part which we should understand is that Intel did it because it was very good as space. So this was the before processor they had, and you can see it's quite copied, not exactly the same, but you can see many parts very similar. Uh, some parts they are even removed between generation 11 and 12, like this image processing unit. If I understood correctly, it had some computation, let's say AI acceleration, and it looks it's quite reduced or not existent. I could not see it in the 12th generation. But the bottom line is that it adds very little area on the right, and it improves a lot. And even so, it improves a lot the numbers. And the trick and the misunderstanding, I think when people they think atoms, they think or Gracemont e-cores, they come from atom history, so they think the atoms are slow. And this was definitely true. They are efficient, but they cut every transistor for it. And this is not true for the atoms. So the original atoms, they had the maximum power grading of 8 watts, if I read correctly. And they had 1 or 2 cores. And this was the 2 cores. It had 8 watt, if I understood correctly. So the typical processor had around 2.5 watt. Uh, so, but this is not important if it was 1 or 2 or 4 watts. But today the 8 watt is kind of the low end atom you can buy it in a laptop. So this was the maximum you could get. Today it's kind of the minimum. The other part, it was based on the uh, P5 architecture or IE486. What it means, it was kind of pipelined. It was something which named superscalar, but it was in order. It was quite slow compared to today's designs, which are out of orders. And you should also see the year when it was launched. It was in 2008. So Intel was reasonable, low power. You could use to do some computations, but it was not that advanced, especially when you need a lot of memory accesses. It was very slow in this part. And you can see this relatively good performance. Okay. The next architecture was silver mount, and the silver mount, what it did, it improved. It was using a newer process, smaller transistors, and it was dropping one feature, hyperthreading, and it would add out of order execution. And this is very good if you want to use it with a low power server. So you can see up to 8 cores. That's the reason that you can use it for lower power servers. And this why you could improve to up to 20 watts for server components. But in general, uh, they had 10 watts, but you could have servers with 20 watts. That's the bottom line I want to make. And it was also very low cost, uh, so very good to have it. After this out of order execution, and out of order executions are all the processors of today, the next iteration, it made it with, before it was 2 wide superscalar, right now it's 3 wide, so it could improve up to 50%. Just to say up to means kind of 20% likely computationally. Similarly, Goldmont Plus will go to 4 wide, so it will increase by another 10-15%. And Tremont, it will also make it 6 wide. So it's already faster and faster and faster, just to be very clear. And today's what is in the atom now is that it's already one league ahead. So Tremont, which was before, and in Atoms, you could see that all the operations, even in floating point, are kind of in the same league with Zen 2, which are in PlayStation 5. So these are very important cores. If you buy again a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox, latest Xbox will have kind of similar architecture, just a bit slower multiplication of floating points. If you look on how many operations per cycle, Gracemont would be more or less just a bit slower than the fastest core you have, like Zen 1, 2, 3 or Skylake. It's still worse, but not that bad. And here Gracemont is quite similar to Zen 2 in some operations. In out of order execution, it's in between fourth and very rarely up to second generation, like here for load queue. But in many operations is again up to the sixth or seventh generation of Intel. So there are a few questions. So let's look on this diagram, and I will undo because I was making some notes. Uh, First of all, let's understand how could they get most of the performance of a big core, but they use just, let's say, a quarter of the big core. And one of them is, for example, you see floating point unit. If you put it here, there will be no space for the core. So the floating point capacity is much smaller. So let's say it's something like that. It's not annotated, but they reduce some operations which they don't care so much. Also the cache, if you put it in the cores, again you'll have nothing to compute. So the cache is also removed. There is a cache, but it's shared between all the processors. It's also less integrated. So here, and this means that this cores, as much as they talk more between them, it's slower. And if we would want to go from this core to that core, here it will go to this level to cache through the ring agent, but to this level 3, and more or less it will go directly here. So it will be kind of one hop, the level 3 ring, level 3 cache, and here. And here it's much pricier. It goes here, it will have to wait for some kind of ring here to synchronize all the cores. After that, it will go here, it goes through the ring, it goes through the ring, it goes here into the cache, but it will also have to synchronize with all these cores. So it's a more chatty protocol basically. So they are not too good into memory accesses, but the cost is good if you want to compute. And this is what is my argument about, that if Intel ever wants to do just some efficiency cores, to say so, they can get just one big core, delete this one, put this one core, and whatever tasks are considered as background by operating system, this big core could compute them. And if you have very few background tasks, this would run very fast, even much faster than these ones. And the reason why it's also much faster, it has nothing to do with how efficient or how compute are, it's simply how many watts. So here you probably can put 20 watts in one core. Here you can't put 20 watts because 20 watts will burn whatever core is. Maybe you can put 5 watts here, here 5 watts, 5 watts, 5 watts. And obviously the 20 watts, because you saw the power curve, these ones go much higher. So in general, I want to say that you can see that performance is not related necessarily with efficiency, but because here there are so many compute units minus cutting what is considered not used, some wiring between caches, and the caches are smaller. This is what they make them so compute heavy. So what is the conclusion at the end? Because these cores are so compute efficient, I think one part to me sounds reasonable that I could guess Intel could do it, but I personally don't know why they don't do it, at least for some segment. And that segment is that these are compute heavy, right? So technically, I would say Intel tomorrow they could replace all these big cores with clusters. I'll put a plus on every cluster. So if they will use uh, these clusters, uh, so assuming here there will be 4 cores, this will mean a 32 core Gracemont and 2 core high performance ones. And this will what it would mean that if you run something that really needs quick response, you'll have access. But if you need something with many more cores than a real cores, to say so, you'll have access to. And where I think it will worth a lot is into compute heavy workstation kind of work place. So if you'd want to buy in the past a card like this, it will cost you a lot. So you could buy before it was named Intel Phi or Phi, which had really 32 cores Atom, and they were even weaker than this ones. It was I think $2,500, and if you put with inflation, it will be maybe $3,000. So with this design, you can work with a single processor, which costs I don't know $50 to make, but it's sold today with 500. So this one would be a 5 times less cost, and obviously right now you supposedly can buy 54 56 cores from Intel. So if every of these 56 cores would be replaced with a tile, it will mean 200 cores, and this is a territory which the strongest Threadripper can't compete with. I'm not saying we should have a 200 cores given to us. You understand this would be pricey option, but there are compute problems which would want this kind of cores. But if I would not buy though a 200 cores CPU, I would definitely buy a 32 cores CPU with real cores in the same envelope with a smaller or as regular cores as is today. And this could be done without even shrinking the node. And this could make possible some classes of problems, which I personally I more often working, but it will not look too good for games. That's the sad part. Okay, so assuming that it was interesting, join. I write from time to time this topic, and see you next time. Bye bye.